All right, welcome to another episode of NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we are talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I am joined by a writer for the Jaguars Wire and also host of Duval Tui Pod, Daniel Griffis. How are you doing?
Hey, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been, I'm sure up and down, throughout the Jaguars, last few years, and mostly down. But when you look at it, there's a lot of hope with this franchise. You know, as far as kind of draft wise in some of the pieces that they have, young players. But before we kind of get to that, definitely want to get into that. But before we want to, I just want to kind of touch a little bit on what your thoughts are kind of or were from the Urban Meyer kind of debacle and then now the ability to just kind of move on from Urban Meyer and everything kind of that he brought to the franchise.
Yeah, when Sean Cobb made it pretty clear that Urban Meyer was his guy from the start, they didn't do a whole lot of intensive interviewing during that cycle. I know they interviewed Dabble and some other guys, but Urban Meyer or Sean Cobb made it pretty clear that Urban Meyer was his guy from the beginning. And I think that ultimately set them back this previous year because they could have. A lot of the candidates were still available. Brian Dabble, Enemy, so they could have used that opportunity kind of a head up or a leg up this past year. But they wanted Urban Meyer. They made that very clear. Gave him what was reported as a fairly large contract. The numbers never came out. But Shad Khan, had a good relationship with Urban Meyer prior to hiring him in Jacksonville, and for various reasons that have plagued Urban Meyer's entire career, for similar reasons, it didn't work out in Jacksonville, namely his relationships with people in the organization. That's been a problem that he's had since he was at Florida and various stops along his way, and it was a concern of many, including myself, when he was hired for the position. It I expected more from him as a coach from the football standpoint. I kind of figured, hey, at least he's a successful, football coach, and that didn't materialize in the way that I thought it would. I've never been a huge Urban Meyer fan myself, but I thought that at least he'd be smart enough football mind to at least make it look competent, and that wasn't the case. He struggled with naming players on the team, among many other things. That he threw some coaches under the bus in regards to some coaching decisions regarding specifically James Robinson and his usage. That was kind of an issue. He threw Parmalee, the running back coach, under the bus there, and then he was not allowed to speak for himself. So it's kind of a sour situation in all aspects, whether it's his relationships with the coaches or the players, and both on the and as well on the field. Production just was not there for about 6 or 7 weeks. It was some of the worst football on the field in Jaguars history. They struggled to get the ball past midfield. And the offense never really seemed to progress, and in some ways it regressed as the season went on.
Yeah, it was really bizarre. I mean, a lot of stuff. I mean, you touched on a lot of it, So with that sour taste in your mouth and, Jaguars fans, there has to be a lot of optimism, going into, this year now with the new head coach. Number one, were you surprised it was Doug Pederson? And number two, what are your expectations for Doug Pederson with the Jaguars in his first year with the team?
Sure. Yeah, this past hiring cycle was about as weird as the Urban Meyer cycle was. It was originally reported that Byron Leftwich and the Jaguars had pretty much finalized the deal, and then for various circumstances that ended up falling through. And then the Jaguars kind of had to look at Plan B, and they were looking at Bill O'Brien was a guy that they brought in to talk to, as well as they wanted to bring in Kevin O'Connell. He ended up going to Minnesota, but Doug Pederson was the first person they interviewed, which kind of makes sense because he didn't have a job. He's a little
right.
He's a little more flexible to come in for an interview. But he was the guy that they ended up bringing back for a second interview, and he was the guy that they ended up hiring. I personally am a little. I was a little concerned after they hired him. I'll be honest. I know he's a football coach, a lot of respect for Doug Pederson. It just kind of looked like, from the Jaguars' perspective, that he wasn't their front guy, or number two, or number three, for that matter. They had, Byron Leftwich they brought in for a second interview. They tried to bring in Nathaniel Hackett for a second interview, but Chicago didn't let that happen. And I believe Todd Bowles they also wanted to bring in for a second interview. It ended up that it was Doug Pederson, who was their first guy. And it's nothing to no ill thoughts about Doug Pederson himself. It was just the Jaguars thought process there, and process is very strange. And it took a while. They had almost a month head start, and they were one of the last hires to happen. I'm very excited for I think he brings a level of stability that the team really needs, and organization, especially with Trent Baalke back as GM. He's returning. I'm not sure what that situation was like with Urban Meyer. I kind of thought that Trent Baalke was more so of a puppet GM originally, and then they kept him on, and I was very confused by that. I wasn't sure exactly how the reins have shifted, but it seems like they're in a much more
stable. Collaborative, yes.
From an organization standpoint, front office standpoint.
Is that why Byron Leftwich didn't want to take the job? I mean, because of Trent Baalke, was that kind of the story there?
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. He wanted to bring in Adrian. Oh gosh, he's a front office member in Arizona that he previously worked with when he was in Arizona. I'm blanking. Adrian Wilson.
Oh yes, yep.
It sounded like he wanted to bring in Adrian Wilson, or at the very least, wasn't a fan of Trent Baalke. And it seemed from various reports that was kind of something that happened a lot with some of the coaches that they wanted to interview and wanted to bring in. I know that Dan Quinn said, "I'm not even going to interview with you guys." He rejected an interview.
Wow, yeah.
So it never came out as to specifically why that was, but that was kind of the going educated guess at the time.
Yeah, and when you look at this team, I mean, there's a lot of young pieces, a lot of potential there. I mean, even they've got a Josh Allen, not the Josh Allen, but a Josh Allen that has done well. Trevor Lawrence. You got all these different pieces, and with the draft, I mean, they added a lot of pieces. That could potentially help them this year. I mean, what were your thoughts? I mean, when they were making some of these picks, and how do they fit into this team for this year and then going forward with the Jaguars?
Sure. The Trayvon Walker pick screams Trent Baalke. He's always been a guy that has emphasized athletic profile. Going back to a guy like Aldon Smith that he drafted while he was in San Francisco. I myself was more so of a fan of Aiden Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeau. I thought for the Jaguars, going with a little safer option was probably the better choice. But Trent Baalke in the front office, don't necessarily agree. But yeah, I mean, if Trayvon Walker works out, it's he could be one of the best players on the team and one of the best players in the division or the league. He's got that athletic makeup. That they could really he could really bust out. Similar to he's a guy I look at similar in the mold of like a Rashawn Gary, who's done very well past year. I'm just a bit concerned as to what his production and impact is going to be the first couple of years as he works to improve. He wasn't really a pass rusher at Georgia. That wasn't something that they asked him to do. So I'm concerned because these are the most formative years of Trevor Lawrence's career. And I thought that going with a guy that's more pro ready right now would help the Jaguars be in a situation where they can help Trevor Lawrence more now and next year, more so than in the future. Because this year is the most important year of Trevor Lawrence's career. They look like they're playing more of a long game with Trayvon Walker. I love trading up for Devin Lloyd. I thought he was one of the best players in the draft. Jaguars had a big need at linebacker. They went and got a player that they didn't think was going to be there at 33. And looking at who New England took with Cole Strange at 20, 27, something like that.
Yeah.
It looked like that was kind of the case. So I think that they saw that they could go get two of the best players in the draft, and they went and did that. So I do give Trent Baalke a lot of credit for making that move. I think it probably would have been slim pickings at 33 if they stayed there. Luke Fortner, I love. The Jaguars have some interior offensive line need prior to this. Brandon Litter recently retired, and they can have a battle there between Luke Fortner and Tyler Shatley at center. The Jaguars also said that they plan to work him out at right guard and left guard. Right guard, I assume, is Brandon Scherf. I don't see them having a plan to so he can definitely fight for a starting job at left guard or center, depending on how that shakes out. The Jaguars have put a lot of they've invested a lot into that offensive line the last year and a half. With Walker Little, they re-signed Cam Robinson after tagging him, as well as getting Brandon Scherf, like I said, to a huge contract this Chad Muma, I love. I was a bit confused with them. I thought it was a bit redundant to take another linebacker because
that's what I was wondering. Yeah, and it looks like they have him slated as a backup too, right? Or
they signed Foye and gave him a pretty big contract, the linebacker from Atlanta in free agency. And after they took Devin Lloyd, I'm like, all right, we're set at linebacker. The depth is always a need that you can always improve depth at any position for that matter. But the Chad Muma one, they talked about. They talked about playing him at the money backer position, which is what Deion Buchanan played for. Looking at our Mike Caldwell. Mike Caldwell's defense. So I don't. Chad Muma's a very different player than Deion Buchanan, so I'm a little interested to see if they change his body type as well as Trayvon Walker, because they've said they're going to play him at linebacker, and God bless him, he's a pretty big boy. He tipped the scales at like 280 at Georgia, 275, 280. So I'm a bit interested to see how they're going to shape these guys' body as they get into the NFL weight room this summer and into the fall. As to see what that looked like. I had assumed when they drafted Trayvon Walker, they were going to play him at big end. He's 280. I thought Josh Allen and Arden Key would be on the outside linebacker position because they've talked about running a 3-4 with multiple defensive front looks. But I really like what they've done in free agency in the draft in terms of emphasizing the offensive line and the front seven on the defense. They added Arden Key, who had a pretty successful year last year with San Francisco. I believe he had 6.5 sacks. Josh Allen is another guy that you're hoping with this added weapons on the defensive front, he can get some more one-on-one looks and get after the passer. Trayvon Walker as well. You hope at least that he's a difference maker in the run game and a guy that can at least push some guys into Josh Allen and even if he's not productive from a numbers standpoint, because like I said, he doesn't have a lot of experience rushing the passer, so that's going to be something that the Jaguars have to work on him with. And that's something that hopefully he gets better with as his career goes on.
Especially, when you look at his division, right, with Tennessee and the Colts, right, two of the best running backs in the NFL in that division. That's
and Houston, you're assuming that they drafted Damian Pierce and put they drafted Kenyon Green as well, putting a big emphasis on them for the run game, helping out rookie Davis Mills. So if there was ever a division to have a strong front seven and a strong run defense, it'd be in the AFC South. And that goes with them drafting Devin Lloyd and Chad Muma and signing Foye, who led the NFL in tackles last year. Jaguars are really hoping that they can hopefully stop Derrick Henry for once in their, franchise history, and as well as Jonathan Taylor.
Well, yeah. And speaking of the running game, what about the Jaguars running game? For whatever reason, James Robinson was in the doghouse, and it was just fantasy wise, I had him, and I just it blew my mind with how talented he is and what he did, the previous year. What do you see the roles of these running backs? And now they added Snoop Connor in the draft. Maybe short yardage for him. What do you see all these roles here, shaking out on the Jaguars offense, the running backs?
Sure. Yeah. It's a really interesting situation because Urban Meyer was the one that kind of led the drafting of Travis Etienne and had this envisionment of him as being some like slot receiver out of the backfield pass reception option.
Like maybe a Percy Harvin kind of thing.
Yeah, or Kadarius Toney. He
Mm,
really wanted Kadarius Toney, and I
hmm
think after Kadarius Toney went to the Giants, I think Urban Meyer just drafted the best athlete, and they talked about using him as a receiver more than they talked about using him as a running back, and that was very confusing to me. And now that he's gone, I'm not really. I assume that Doug Peterson's going to want him more of in a running back role. Um, he said that he's healthy. We'll see how football healthy he is. That's a different animal. He hasn't played football in a
hmm
really long time, and he's coming off of a nasty injury. It's one that the Jaguar fans are very familiar with because it's what ended up ending Maurice Jones-Drew's career in Jacksonville.
mm,
Listrink. And then James Robinson's coming off of an Achilles tear against the Jets, I believe, in week 15 or 16.
hmm
The Jags, on paper, the Jaguars running back depth chart looks really good, but when you look at it, you've got two guys that are coming out with really significant injuries, and I think that kind of played a part into the Snoop Conner pick. I'll be honest
hmm
with you, I had not heard a word about Snoop Conner. I had no idea who he was, and I do a lot of stuff for the draft and
Yeah.
coverage and knowing who guys are. I saw running back Old Miss, and I was like, oh, we drafted Jerry on Ely. He's a very well documented player in his own right, and
So he,
I'm
yeah.
familiar with him as a baseball. He plays baseball too.
Oh, he
Uh,
does. Yeah.
yeah, he's a center fielder for Old Miss. So they drafted Snoop Conner, and I was like, I had no idea that he was even in this draft. It looks like he's more of a short yardage, bigger guy.
hmm
He may get some looks early on with Etienne and Robinson coming off an injury. The hope is that Robinson and Etienne can come in and start the season. But I would imagine that they probably won't have them carry too big of workloads early on. Um,
Yeah, and when you talk about carrying a workload, what do you see? Trevor Lawrence's workload here as he moves into this year. I mean, is he gonna just be able to take over the game? With Doug Peterson's kind of offense. I mean, what are your expectations here for Trevor Lawrence in year two?
sure. I don't expect him to have our Justin Herbert 5,100 yards, 38 touchdowns, 15 interceptions season. I don't think that's on the table. Um, I don't think that's who the Jaguars want to be. I don't think that's who
hmm
Doug Pederson wants to be.
hmm
Ideally, I think that they want to go with a strong run game, kind of similar to what they had in Philadelphia, and what Philadelphia still does, and what a lot of Doug Pederson's disciples have fallen in his footsteps and kind of creating a plan around. Philadelphia was, I believe, the number one run team in football last year with Jalen Hurts and those guys. So I think that the Jaguars want to get Trevor Lawrence rolling. He had a stretch in the middle of the season. He really didn't look comfortable. Jaguars really struggled to throw the ball down the field for various reasons. They had a lot of injuries that also played a role into that. Jamal Agnew went down. Dan Arnold went down, who at the time, sadly, were their two best offensive players.
Yeah.
DJ Chark got hurt against the Bengals early on in the year, and he had 2 touchdowns, which was a lot because Trevor Lawrence only threw 11, 12. That kind of hurt. He was going to be a big red zone guy for them.
Wh-
Um,
when you look at Trevor Lawrence's like struggles, I mean, did it coincide it all with Urban Myers, his kind of all that? I mean, that had to be a lot, for a rookie quarterback to try to navigate, and then you know it, we worry about I think sometimes coaches ruining rookie quarterbacks. I mean, if he wasn't ruined in year one by this, I mean, I, it was just a heck of a year one for him.
yeah, and I'll give Trevor Lawrence testament to Trevor Lawrence because he had to answer some really tough questions as a rookie quarterback about the Urban Meyer situation, what was going on with the offense. They for a couple weeks there, he had like a 6 or 7 game period where he didn't throw a touchdown. It was horrific, um,
Wow. Yeah.
and it was a situation where the offensive game plan was very strange. They had plays where wide receivers were running into each other on like scissor routes and stuff. They had almost at times like Madden esque uh, route trees or passing concepts. It got better after Bevel took over. And they kind of got that taken care of. I know a lot of the offensive coaches were kind of put off by some of Urban Meyer's comments that were rumored behind the scenes. He was threatening to fire people.
Wow.
Like on a daily or weekly basis, and it's hard to work in an environment like that anywhere. Regardless if it's the NFL, doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, and
No.
it's really hard to succeed when you just second guess yourself the entire time. We have a leader that doesn't promote your excellence or success.
Well, speaking of, inspiring confidence, I mean, what are your thoughts on the Jaguars pass catchers and just that crazy big contract for Christian Kirk? I mean, were you surprised by that? And who is going to be the number one in this group here?
I don't know if they have one.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a situation where they got a lot of guys that work best in the slot,
Mm-hmm.
and on the outside, they gave Marvin Jones a pretty big contract last year, and I was right with that. He wasn't massive or anything like that. But then they still have Laviska Shenault, who really struggled last year. That was pretty saddening to see. I thought he had a really good year, and last year he looked like a ghost out there.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of drop issues. It was having struggles getting open. So that was really disappointing to see. Hopefully he can have a bounce back year. And hopefully the Jaguars can get him some looks. He's a very talented with the ball in his hand. He's one of the most talented NFL receivers. He led the NFL in his rookie year, I believe, in missed tackles or broken tackles. So that's something that I hope they look at and try to fix. But at the same time, they kind of signed Christian Kirk in that same role. Christian Kirk was primarily a slot receiver in Arizona. He's not the biggest guy in the world, and he's best in the slot. And I assume that Marvin Jones is going to be their X number one, whatever you want to call it. They don't really have one, but he's going to be their most experienced receiver. But they gave Christian Kirk this giant contract, and I was a bit confused. He's never had a 1,000-yard receiver. He's a very talented receiver. I don't mean to take anything away from his production and his skill set, but at the same time, I'm not sure that it was worth $17 to $21 million a year, which is what they gave him with incentives, and it reset the market. And you've seen a big fallout from that. A lot of guys traded. A lot of guys can't sign contracts with their teams because of this deal. I'm not sure, if they were going to give that contract out, I would have liked to have them give it to a guy that's a little more established in the NFL and more of an outside receiver, especially in an offense, Doug Pederson, where it's it features a lot of bigger bodies. You had like Alshon Jeffrey and tight end threats, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, he uses his tight ends more similarly to receivers than traditional tight ends. So if they got a bigger guy, say it's just a reference. There was no way, just an example. There's no way they would have got Treylon Burks, but Treylon Burks is a bigger slot guy, or Drake London. Somebody of that mold. Christian Kirk doesn't exactly fit that. So I have a lot of respect for Christian Kirk as a football player. Hopefully it works out. Definitely in a better situation right now than they have been in previous years. Zay Jones one was another very strange contract. 3 years, $30 million. I kind of think that he's just a guy. That's a lot of money for a guy who really has never started in his NFL career. So I'm interested. Hopefully, they definitely have Christian Kirk and Laviska and Marvin Jones definitely have the talent to really make Trevor Lawrence succeed. They just have to kind of figure out how to do that.
And speaking of just a guy, I mean, Evan Ingram, was supposed to be kind of the, next big tight end. Didn't work in with the Giants. They did some different things with him. What do you see Doug Pederson kind of doing with him, and then maybe Dan Arnold?
Yeah, and I really like that you mentioned Dan Arnold, because I think that the Jaguars traded C.J. Henderson for Dan Arnold, and a lot of people, and myself included, weren't that familiar with Dan Arnold. And he came in last year and had a really for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, he was our best player on offense.
Mm-hmm.
He was a guy that was reliable and was there for Trevor Lawrence. Hopefully, they can continue that chemistry, and hopefully, I know that Doug Pederson loves running 2 tight end sets. Hopefully, they can get both of them involved, and hopefully, they can help each other out. Evan Ingram's not a guy that is a incredible blocker, but
Yep. Yep.
he's a guy that at the very least, he's one of the most physically talented players on your football field. Whether that will work out in Jacksonville, I'm skeptical of.
Yeah.
But at worst, you have a guy that's really talented, and defenses do have to consider him on the field just because of the athlete that he is, level of athlete that he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at this team, I mean, they've made some moves. How far are they away from contending for the playoffs?
It helps that if we were in any other division, I'd tell you we're miles off.
Yeah.
I look at teams. I look at the AFC in general, and the Jaguars. I mean, you're looking at teams like the Chargers with Justin Herbert, Buffalo with Josh Allen, Kansas City with Pat Mahomes. I mean, you look at Trevor Lawrence and you think the absolute best that Trevor Lawrence can be, if he turned out to be Justin Herbert. The Jaguars are still miles behind
Mm-hmm.
the roster talent that those teams have. Trevor Lawrence, as great as he could be, and he can be by far the best player in Jaguars history, but it's hard to be better than Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes, and Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
So, as close as he can get to that gap, and hopefully he does in the coming years. I'm not sure that it's going to be this year. The Jaguars are still a ways away, I think, but they got to do a lot more to help him out. Those guys have all had incredible receivers in their young careers.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City just got rid of Tyreek Hill, but at the same time, Pat Mahomes is a little older now.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not 22, 23. Josh Allen has had Stephon Diggs. Gabriel Davis has really come alive last year. And Justin Herbert's got one of, if not the best route runner in the NFL, and one of the most experienced route runners in the NFL, and Keenan Allen. And he's got Mike Williams, who's a huge target for them. He had Hunter Henry for a year. So I think the Jaguars have to do a lot better surrounding Trevor Lawrence with talent, and that goes for the remainder of his career.
Yeah,
the Jaguars aren't in a situation where they can get lax with that.
Right.
You look at next year's draft, and the Jaguars are already being mocked. Jackson Smith-Njigba and Keyshawn Butte. And you got tight ends. Doug Pederson's a huge tight end guy, so you got guys like Eric Gilbert next year coming out from Georgia, Michael Meyer from Notre Dame. I believe his first name. Might be wrong on that. Might be Matthew. But and next year's free agency wide receiver class is not that great.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys I expect to either stay or there's not. Or it's guys like Hunter Henry. And Henry doesn't intrigue me as a Jaguars fan because we have 80 million slots.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out already how Laviska Shenault, Jamal Agnew, and Christian Kirk are going to be on the same field at the same time. Because Jamal Agnew was, for a short period of time, our most explosive weapon on offense.
Wow.
We're already in a situation where, like, I'm done with just give me some outside receivers.
Yeah.
So I think the Jaguars can't get lax with their approach on offense or defense, for that matter. I'm pretty happy with what they've done on the defensive side of the ball as well.
When you look at it, how many wins do you think the Jaguars are going to have this year? I mean, what are your expectations?
Oh man, Jaguar fans are like 4, 5.
Yeah,
I still don't think this is a good football team, and it definitely doesn't help that we have to play the AFC West this year. I fully expect to be absolutely waxed by the Chargers in Kansas City. We're not on that same level. Obviously they can surprise. We've somehow beat Buffalo. I was at that game.
Oh yeah,
that was one of the worst football games I have ever watched. Just from a football fan, I think the Jaguars made it inside the red zone once. I don't think Buffalo ever did. And
Wow.
our quarterback for that drive was C.J. Beathard because
Yep.
Trevor Lawrence went down with a ankle injury. Walker Little stepped on his ankle, so that was some of the worst football I've ever. It was great for defense, I guess. Josh Allen, our Josh
Yeah.
Allen,
He did well.
incredible game. He had an interception, a sack, and either a forced fumble. I think it was a fumble recovery against the Bills. Josh Allen. So that was a Josh Allen v. Josh Allen, and somehow we came out on top. And then I watched that team in the AFC Championship, and I was like, how did we? I
Yeah.
have no idea how we competed with these guys. I think Jaguar fans should keep their expectations a little mitigated. A lot of them are really excited about the new pieces that we added, but at the same time, I think we're still a little ways away. If we have a chance to make the playoffs, it's solely because the AFC South is so bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to build on, a lot of positive things. I definitely appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing that. It's going to be interesting to see how things kind of shake out. Definitely want to talk to you, as we kind of get closer to the season as well. And where can everyone find you again?
Oh, sure. Either at Jaguars Wire, I write mostly NFL draft pieces and pieces during the summer. I don't. Haven't been on there as much recently because I am currently a student. So
Yeah.
draft week is the same week as finals.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So draft week, I was like, oh man, I slept like I wrote more than 50 pages in like a 4 day period.
Wow.
I was getting worn out there, but and then on Twitter at Dan D Griffis, and hopefully Jaguars fans have a little more to be excited with going forward. It's not about. I want Jaguar fans to understand that it's not about this year. It's about the next 10 years. Ultimately, if the Jaguars figure it out, and we're perennial playoff contenders, no one's going to care that we went 5-12 now. And Trevor Lawrence's second year. Most of all,
Right.
it's most important you see Trevor Lawrence take it next.
Absolutely.
Last year, he made some plays that you expect Trevor Lawrence to make. But he struggled at times, and at times the team just simply struggled to move the football at all. You'd like to see him show a little more consistency. I love the fact that he was willing to sling it. I don't mind the interceptions as much as we're bad, and as he continues to blossom into Trevor Lawrence in the NFL and what he can be. I don't mind him slinging it a little bit, but that's ultimately what it's about. That's what this year's about. That's what next year's about. As he continues to grow, he's still 23 years old.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. I definitely appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely connect again. Once again, this has been an NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Thanks again, Daniel Griffis.
No problem. Thanks for having me.